Hello, everyone, and welcome back to 48 Now. It is digital host AJ Wiest, and today, for the third time for 48 Now, I am joined with Dr. Wayman E. Burke, former poli-sci and history professor. Wayman, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, sir, and it's always good to be with you. And I've worked with Channel 48 for many, many years, and I always enjoy it.
Yes, sir. And I certainly enjoy having you in here, that is for sure. Every single time you come in here, I definitely feel like I know a lot more than I did when I started my day. So
Okay.
I greatly appreciate
Thank you
it.
for those kind words.
Yes, sir. And I see you have brought in a lot of historical artifacts.
Yes, we have.
Throughout the political years in U.S. history, and I am certainly excited to talk about that with you. But first, I have a few questions for you about the upcoming presidential election and the local election here actually happening today in Scottsboro and in Huntsville. But first, what were your thoughts on the two conventions, like the RNC and the DNC, now that they're in hindsight?
Well, and I've said this over the years, that political opinion can change significantly in a short period of time. Mm-hmm. After Joe Biden's disastrous debate performance, there was great pressure to force him out and to replace him, which, regardless, if you're a Democrat, that turned out to be the wise thing to do, it sounds like. But I also wonder if, of course, he was portrayed, he was being stubborn, he didn't want to, all these people had to press him. But you notice he didn't drop out until after the Republican convention. And that may have been strategic. I just wonder. I don't know. I don't have any. It just seems strange that he waited that long. And did he want him to go ahead and pick a VP, Vance, who has been somewhat controversial or whatever? Would he have chosen maybe a woman had he known that, or did Trump believe that Biden was going to stay in regardless? Because Biden is known as a stubborn individual, I understand. I actually met him one time about 3 decades ago in Birmingham, and nice man. The Republican convention went well as a convention. President Trump, of course, there was an attempted assassination on him right before the convention, and that's an affront to democracy that we should all condemn, of course. So he went into the convention, and although I'm sure anyone would prefer that not to happen, the fact is it was seen as something that he was a survivor, and he had that great shot of the fist and so forth. And his advisors, we read in the media, wanted him to take a softer tone, you might say. And he started out in his speech doing so, and then he just went to the same old script, you might say, or right. Unscript, you might say.
Same old
yeah, and it may have, it probably diminished a lot of the positive, the hope that some people had. But they had a good convention overall. But I would argue the Democrats had a better convention because there was all sorts of fears of protesters in the street that might be a repeat of back in 1968 when it almost all fell apart there in Chicago. And you're too young to remember that, but it felt like the country was just literally coming apart at the seams. And in 1968, the cameras were shifting from the turmoil inside the hall to police fighting protesters outside. Yeah. And it was a terrible look for the Democrats. And that's probably one of the things that led to their downfall. But there were no scenes like that we saw on television at the Democratic Convention. And I'll tell you something else. The Democrats really embraced the patriotic line, which was very interesting. The flags and so forth. It reminded me of more of a Ronald Reagan convention, actually, where they always had flags and we're the patriots, that type of thing. And Trump is, viewed as more of an isolationist and don't get involved in other parts of the world. But anyway, the Democrats seized on that moment. Kamala Harris, I don't care if you like her or dislike her, she gave a dynamic speech. I've watched her as I've watched a number of D's and R's, that is the farm team, you know, sort of coming up through the ranks over the years, and she's dynamic. I'm in California a lot. My son lives there, and it's always interesting to see what's happening in the politics there. And she's always very impressive, always seems to have it together. I always found it interesting that during the Biden administration, they basically kept her in the background. I'm not saying we never saw her, but she wasn't quite as high profile. Now, I say this again, not that agreeing or disagreeing or who you're going to vote for or who you're not going to vote for. I'm just going to say the reality. She's very good with the media. She knows how to give a powerful speech. And I think hopefully a debate, which I like debates.
Yes.
The debate coming up will probably tell us a lot. We will see. Are the expectations too great for her? And if she doesn't meet that mark, sometimes you can win, but if you don't win by a certain margin, you know, it's viewed as a loss in politics, that type of thing. But we'll see.
Yeah, certainly time will tell on that, and I'm certainly excited to watch this debate as well as the VP debate.
Oh, yes.
Walz and Vance.
Her choice of this Tim Walz guy, he's a hunter, was a football coach, and I heard some diminish him. Well, he was just a high school football coach. And I said, why do you want to insult every high school football coach in the country? I mean, they feel what they're doing is important for their kids and so forth. I don't understand that attack.
Right.
And
I love football.
Oh yeah, I do too. And I will tell you, just in case you didn't know, I do worship in the true faith at the Bryant Denny Saban Temple in the holy city of Tuscaloosa. But not everybody can be Nick Saban. But there's some pretty good high school football coaches out there.
There are.
But he knows, and you know, he pleases folks, you know, gun rights, especially hunters and so forth. On that side, he's a living, breathing example of it. On the other side, he was a straight man who felt empathy for LGBTQ kids. Mm-hmm. And he was actually their sponsor. I mean, that took some guts, I'll tell you. At that particular time, it took some guts to do that. And, you know, some had tried to make what he's advocating. No, I doubt if he's advocating anything. He just has a heart for people, it sounds like. And those of us who have been school teachers, it's hard not to have a heart for kids in all sorts of situations.
Absolutely. And talk about Trump's pick as well, J.D. Vance.
Well, J.D. Vance, very interesting character. I don't understand the eyeliner. It's my wife first noted that, and I said, well, that is eyeliner, isn't it? But he is, of course, he wrote that book, Hillbilly Elegy, about folks in Appalachia, and I'm a descendant of folks from the Appalachia, and some people view it as an insult, others view it as a positive, I guess according to what your point of view is. But critics have said this better than really I can, or have asked this question: did he expand his base any? It appeared to me, from what Kamala Harris did, she wanted to expand her base into some of those groups I mentioned. But Trump didn't expand his base. That's what critics are saying.
It was do you think it was possibly a confidence pick? Like Trump kind of thought he had the election kind of in the bag, so.
Well, I mean,
a loyalty thing.
You know, from media reports again, nobody called me up and briefed me. From media reports, it appears that Don Jr. really liked J.D. Vance, and he's not a stupid man. And he's a smart guy, and he liked him a lot, and so from media reports, he encouraged him to. I remember when Trump chose Pence, all those back in 2016. It was reported that Melania, Trump's wife, encouraged him to pick Pence because after meeting with him, she said he won't compete with you. You know, he will stay in the background, which I thought was very interesting. and presidents often do, Democrats and Republicans, would prefer a vice president stay in the background unless they're needed for something. But I tend to agree, he didn't really expand his base in any way I could see. That doesn't mean that they win or lose or whatever, but I think she definitely extended her base. And the thing is about politics, it's about winning over a group of people who may be seen as against you. For example, gun rights people. Mm-hmm. I'll just use those as an example. You're not trying to get 100% of them or even 50% of them. I call it the politics of margins. And that is, you only need 10% of them, for example. Because in a close election, that 10% means a lot. And we're not just talking about one group. You know, we could talk about black men, white women, black women, white men. I may have repeated myself there, but you see what I'm saying.
Right.
Or you're talking about LGBT folks, or you're talking about working people, salaried people versus, say, people in administrative leadership and so forth. Sometimes it's just peeling off a few percentage points, and that's the politics of margins that can make a difference in any race.
I also want to ask about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. withdrawing from the race. After that decision, which candidate or which party do you think kind of benefits more from that decision?
Well, the conventional wisdom seems to believe that former President Trump does. Because he was, his polling numbers are way down from what they once were. And that's often the way it is with third-party spoiler-type candidates. George Wallace, as a matter of fact, in 1968 was up to like 25%, if I recall correctly, in the polls. But he fell to about 13%, which is still a significant amount. But generally, as the election tightens, the third-party folks are pushed out a little bit more.
Right.
So it would appear he endorsed former President Trump, and so we'll see if that's an asset or not. And of course, we talked about Kanye West already, I believe.
Yes, we did. We definitely
Kanye.
did. Love the campaign button. The birthday party.
The birthday party. But I'll say again about Kanye, he was put in by the Trump folks, and as a political strategist, it was probably a pretty good idea to try to peel off some young people who might otherwise vote for Biden in 1920 in some of these very tight states. Didn't turn out that way, but Kanye was on the ballot in about a dozen states, and he got, I believe, over 100,000 votes. So, politics is a lot about emotion. It's issues are important to some people, policies are important to some people, but emotion is a very powerful entity. And some critics over the centuries have said that's one of the weaknesses of the concept of democracy.
Very well said. Yeah. Well, could we also get into the local elections here in Huntsville? What are people voting for today?
Okay, is this aired today?
No.
Okay. Of course, I guess I can say this is election day. And of course, we have two important races for city council. And John Meredith, the incumbent, over in District 5, the western portion of Huntsville, that is actually a 0 because Madison's right in the middle of it. And he first ran in 16, narrowly lost to the incumbent, defeated the incumbent in 20. And this year he is faced by a well-financed, highly respected businesswoman. Should he prevail, he's probably a rising political star, as I've said. And he just has the personality of sort of like a Bill Clinton or a Ronald Reagan. They know how to talk to people. They're very good at that, and that one-to-one. In District 1, the incumbent has been in some controversy, Councilman Devin Keith. Although folks in that area tell me he's running very strong against Michelle Watkins and a couple of other folks. And Michelle has been on the City Board of Education, so well known and so forth. That one may come down to the wire. Oscar Underwood ran for president, the Democratic nomination in 1912, did not win. Woodrow Wilson won. And he ran again with about 24 other people in 1924. And this is where the story gets very interesting. The Democratic Party hasn't always been the progressive party. That's right. Matter of fact, it was the party of states' rights and segregation. Mm-hmm. In all fairness, there were two Democratic parties. There was oversimplifying, a northern party and a southern party. But and as a matter of fact, they often chose nominees by choosing a presidential nominee from the north and a vice presidential nominee from the south to sort of balance out that interest. At the 1924 Democratic National Convention in New York, the Ku Klux Klan had made its second incarnation. This time, they were a more inclusive hate group. They not only hated black folks, they hated Jews, Catholics, vegetarians, a whole list of folks that they didn't like. They were all inclusive. Historians say that perhaps half the delegates to the convention were Klansmen or Klan sympathizers. Mm-hmm. And it really came down between two men, and one of them wasn't Underwood. It came down between William McAdoo, governor of California, who was a Klan sympathizer, and the Catholic governor of New York, Al Smith. And at that time, the Democrats required a 2/3 supermajority to win the nomination. Neither could get the votes. 24 was the longest convention in American history. It went 103 ballots before they chose a candidate. They ultimately chose a man by the name of John W. Davis, who went on to lose to Calvin Coolidge. But the Alabama angle of this story is that Oscar Underwood ran as well. A senator from Alabama introduced a plank to the Democratic platform, which would be the issues that the party stands for, condemning the Ku Klux Klan. And it failed by one vote to be included in the platform. And he continued to speak out against the Klan and its influence and dastardly deeds. But as it got up to 99, 100 ballots and so forth, they actually went to Underwood and offered him the nomination if he would give up his criticism of the Klan. And he said no. Wow. And he never ran again. He wrote this book, The Drifting Sands of Party Politics. And so, that's what it is, and not very exciting reading. But
so that book basically lays out all of his beliefs, political beliefs.
Yeah. But he was the equivalent of Mitch McConnell or Chuck Schumer. He was a party leader in the U.S. Senate. He was known nationally, that type of thing. Now, as I talk about these things, I'll hold up some of these artifacts, I guess. This right here is a 1789 George Washington inauguration medal. Wow. They are very pricey. I wanted one all my life, and I finally traded for one. And anyway, there was not a traditional campaign. We think of campaigns today at that time. And the this is Abraham Lincoln, 1864.
So these medals, what did these serve as?
People wore them on their clothing.
Oh, it was like buttons, campaign buttons.
Yeah. The campaign button wasn't invented until 1894. They were first used in the 1896 presidential election, yeah.
And this was George Washington's campaign.
Yeah. Somebody, wow. I'm guessing, wore that. I thought I had another, I guess I don't. I thought I had another Lincoln in here. This is a Lincoln 1864 campaign medal, and they had holes. People would wear them on strings and that type of thing.
Wow.
And this was actually originally a stud. A stud is something you would put in a lapel for a U.S. grant, for example. I don't know if you want to get in that close or not. The man who was possibly the first gay person to hold political office was William Rufus King. That's a ballot from that election. Oh, this is a Lincoln 1860. The way you know the difference is he didn't have a beard in 1860.
It's funny, like these two buttons, did these by any chance have any influence on maybe the U.S. currency, like the U.S. dime or the U.S. penny?
I have no idea about that, but I just don't know the answer to that. I wish I could tell you.
Just looking at them at first sight, it looks like a big penny.
Yeah. But this is a Franklin Pierce. His image is on it, but King's name is on the back of it, William Rufus King. King was a plantation owner, slaveholder, so forth. Now, actually, he never served as vice president because he was chosen. He had tuberculosis. He was in Cuba for treatment. And he was actually inaugurated in Cuba, the first time a president or vice president, the only time they were inaugurated on foreign soil. And when he returned, he died a few weeks later, so he never actually served. He was in the Senate prior to that time. So he was put on for sectional politics, political reasons. This is the first Republican nominee for president. His name is James C. Fremont. That's a postal thing, 1856.
Wow.
And that's the first time the Republicans nominated a candidate for president. And that's just one of many things. I found that one interesting. Had a stamp from the period which sort of legitimizes it and so forth.
And you said that was the first time the Republicans nominated
yes,
a candidate?
The Republican Party didn't come into existence until 1854. The Democratic Party is the oldest continually existing political party in the world. It was originally called the Anti-Federalist Faction. They were opposed to the adoption of the Constitution initially. And then they were opposed, they wanted a strict interpretation of the Constitution, which is more like modern day conservatives, if you will, and our conservative thinking. The Federalist Party emerged from that period as well, led by Alexander Hamilton. And it died out after the War of 1812 because they appeared to be unpatriotic in the war when they were totally against the U.S. getting in the war. And after the British burned the city of Washington, they actually met in Hartford, Connecticut, and voted for the Northeast to secede from the United States. And then a couple of weeks right after then, news came that Jackson had defeated the British at New Orleans. And public opinion can change overnight. That's just a fact then and now. It can go like, a month ago, Donald Trump had it in the bag. A month later, he's on the ropes.
That's right.
Died out. There was a period like in 1920, there was only the Democratic nominee, 1820 rather, and he, James Monroe, he actually won all the electoral votes, but one voted against him out of historical reason of believing that Washington should be the only unanimous president. By 1828, the modern party system begins because something called the National Republican Party came into existence. But that's not the modern Republican Party either necessarily. They were succeeded by the Whig Party, who elected two candidates, William Henry Harrison in 1840, Zachary Taylor in 1848. But they were so divided because you had the Cotton faction, which was pro-slavery, and the Freedom faction, the conscious faction, that wanted emancipation. So in 1854, a group of people met in several places, groups of people met, and it included probably some fossil Federalists, some that may have been ancient in age by that time, and it included National Republicans and Whigs, and people who generally hated Andy Jackson, although he'd been dead for almost a decade. And but the central core of the Republican Party were the abolitionists, people who wanted to do away with slavery. And they ran their first candidate against James Buchanan in 1856. And in 1860, they elected their first president, Abraham Lincoln. It started out as a regional party. As a matter of fact, it was very difficult for the Republican Party to win in the Deep South. As a matter of fact, it wasn't until 1964 that, well, I take that back. Grant, let's say, after the Reconstruction, they went almost a century before they won any states in the Deep South in 1964, Barry Goldwater. Now let me tell you something else. The Democratic Party, and I always have to tell my students this, if you're reading about this, don't become confused. They refer to the Democratic Party in the 1790s as the Republican Party. You will even find artifacts that say the Republican or Jeffersonian Republicans. I call them the Democratic Republicans. A lot of people do, because it became known as the Democratic Party. But originally the Democratic Party were known as the Republicans. And so, nothing like confusing folk. This man right here, his name is James G. Birney. Says he's from Michigan. Give a little history about him. James G. Birney was arrived in Huntsville in the 1810s. He was one of those young men who had graduated from Transylvania College, and he was from a wealthy family, and he had money, and he was a lawyer. And he came here and he established a law practice because this was the frontier. A young man going out to find his way and so forth. He also bought a plantation out in Triana and was a large slaveholder. But he had a religious epiphany. He had always had doubts, but he had a religious epiphany and became an abolitionist, ironically. And he was on the first board of directors of the University of Alabama. He was an alternate delegate to the 1819 state constitution here in Huntsville. And he was mayor of Huntsville in 1829, I believe it was, the late 20s, I'll just say that. And he led this one of the many anti-slavery movements at the time. He and most early abolitionist groups were religious-based. After the Nat Turner Rebellion up in Virginia in 1832, most were forced out of the South, and he was one of them. And so he continued his effort. He founded the first abolitionist political party known as the Liberty Party in 1840, and he was the nominee in 1840 and 1844. Ironically, in 1844, he pulled just enough votes from Henry Clay. Many historians believe that Henry Clay would have gotten those 16,000 votes in New York because Pope only won by 5,000 votes. Mm-hmm. So if the bulk of those votes had have gone to Clay, Clay would have been president because New York's electoral votes would have switched columns.
Right.
It was one of those true forks in the road in American politics. And he had two sons who were brigadier generals. Matter of fact, a man who still lives here, I don't think he's in very good health right now, I'm told, Topper Birney, who was a member of the City Board of Education for many years. That's his great-great-grandfather.
Really? Yeah. Wow.
And that's an ad out of a newspaper.
So the Birney family certainly runs deep here.
Oh, yeah. He was an engineer at NASA. And then, of course, you got George Wallace. who ran for president 4 times, 3 times as a Democrat, 1 time as an American Independent Party in 1968. And, you know, the 2 candidates running now, that's a button I got. I was with 48 with Liz, and I went out and covered him when he was in Madison in 2015. I got that button there. And I like that one there of Kamala from 1920, Fight Like a Girl. So I like this one from Gerald Ford. That's a Ford.
Yeah, Ford for president.
Yeah. This is
that the Model T?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is Jimmy Carter. That is one of the most valuable modern political buttons in the hobby. Sells for several $100s. It's the Alabama Committee on Political Education put out by the AFL-CIO in Alabama, 1976. Yeah. Very valuable button. John Sparkman, a lot of things named for John Sparkman around here. He was the 1952 VP with Adlai Stevenson.
And Stevenson, another big name.
Oh yeah. Stevenson's not from Alabama, but yes, his family has a long storied history. He's from Illinois. Oh, and we also had a Speaker of the House, William Bankhead. Okay. And he entertained running for president. He was Speaker of the House of Representatives from about 1936 to 1941, I believe it was. And he was a couple of things. He was a big FDR backer. FDR considered running him for vice president because he switched vice presidents in 1940. And but Bankhead was ill, but he was on the first University of Alabama football team in 1892. They didn't have a good year. And
they weren't the Crimson Tide that they are today.
No, they're not. They were not Crimson. But he may be more famous for his daughter, the famous actress Tallulah Bankhead. And she was sort of a Angelina Jolie of her day, you might say. She was well known in the acting world at the time. Matter of fact, they've got a plaque for her up on the square, on the East Side Square, in front of the I. Schiffman building. And she was born there because this man, when she was born, was city attorney for the city of Huntsville. So anyway, there are all sorts of stories that lead to various places.